and welcome to another watch list, my regular rundown of what I've been watching and what I've been up to. This week we've got, well, a general loose October vibe to it, and we're going to start with the Vinegar Syndrome release, and that is the recent release of Spellcaster, the VSA release that comes in this rather gorgeous slipcover. Spellcaster tells the story of, well, a group of people who have won a trip to a castle in Italy where they have the opportunity to find $1 million as part of a rock cable TV rock channel contest. Once they get there, they realise that everything's not just quite as it should be, and that things start happening to various people there in typical slasher style, let's say, as there seems to be some unknown force within the castle that seems to be controlling things going forward. And what you're left with is this 80s retro vibe film, which plays on an awful lot of the themes that were around the films of those times, and especially of this genre, as you have the weird and wacky video jockey leading everybody along, trying to keep the show going, and then, you know, people of, you know, varying degrees of dastardliness, you know, flaws of character come out to the fore in lots of people as we go through. And to top off the whole 80s theme, Animant is in the film, albeit briefly, towards the end. I'm sure once you start watching the movie, you can kind of get a feel for who he is and who he's going to be. But Spellcaster, I thought, was a pretty good watch. I mean, one I'm very glad that I picked up, and one that I'm very happy to keep in my collection. There are some decent extras on here. I've got some interviews with some of the cast, which is great. Things that I didn't realise is that one of the actresses in it was actually the girl of the Take On Me video. I mean, if I'd have watched it at the time, I probably would have definitely noticed that, but obviously watching it this many years later, it's very different. But yeah, a good watch, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. On the subject of kitsch films and things that maybe aren't the best quality, or the best quality being the wrong word, but the best well-received movie, I picked up the recent 88 Films release of Street Fighter, part of their Jean-Claude Van Damme series that they have here, and this is the 1994 film Street Fighter. Now, I was a big Street Fighter fan. I mean, I think Street Fighter 2 is in the conversation always of being one of the greatest video games of all time, and here we had the movie franchise of it, or what they hoped to think was to be the movie franchise. Except, one, it wasn't well received, and two, I mean, it's just not very good. It's just not a very good movie. However, as these things go on in years and you watch these in retrospect, it's kind of great at the same time. I mean, watching how kind of low budget it seemed to be. It seemed to be they spent all the money on the actors and the actresses, namely on Jean-Claude Van Damme and Raul Julia, who plays Bison in it. You've Kylie's in it as Cammy. You have a lot of very bit part actors that were in there. And you get what is not what you would expect. So you would have expected this to be a tournament of some sort where people fought off against each other, but they didn't go in that direction. They tried to tell a narrative story where each of the characters fit into the goodies or the baddies. So on the good side, you have Cammy, you have Thunderhawk, you have Balrog, you have Eddie Honda, and on the bad side, you have Zangief and DJ, and you get the idea. Like I say, it's not a great movie. I mean, you can tell it's a first-time director, made by Steven D'Souza, and, you know, I think the film falls flat in being an authentic video game franchise, but I think what you get at the end is a pretty enjoyable kind of watch, and one that like, I could recommend this. I mean, I remember seeing it at the time and thinking, God, this is awful, because I was wanting a video game adaptation. I wanted something that was invoked what was good about the video game, and that doesn't happen here at all. In fact, the choice of Van Damme to play Guile especially is kind of lost on me. I mean, it must have been a case that they hired Van Damme, and it seemed to be they got Van Damme, and then they decided, well, which character fits best with who he's going to be, and you know, the French accent in Guile doesn't seem to work very well, but it kind of, in retrospect, fits in with the kitschy nature of the movie in total. So that is Street Fighter, and I enjoyed it. I will continue to pick up the 88 films releases of Jean-Claude Van Damme because they're good fun. Plus this disc is stacked, STACKED, 2 commentaries, long interviews, making of featurettes, bits on the history of Street Fighter, the game, on the score, tons of special features in here, more than you could take a stick at. Next up is what would seem to be marriage made in heaven. John Carpenter, one of the greatest directors and makers of cult movies, and vampires. And there it is, Vampires, the indicator release of Vampires. You would have thought it was a great match. We even have James Woods in there, thrown in for a good measure. And what you get is it's hard not to say disappointing, but again, still very watchable version of the vampire lore. You basically have James Wood, who is the master slayer, or the top slayer of vampires for the church, as he travels around taking out nests of vampires with his team until they meet their match, so to speak, with a master vampire of his own who is intent on, well, being more powerful, I think is probably the best way to put it. And this film doesn't get an awful lot of love. I can see why. I mean, I think the fact that it was a vampire movie and that so much of it's dark and kind of, and the problem that many films come to when you're trying to shoot in the dark in daytime, which is when they seem to go out and hunt them. I think some of it gets lost in there in the look of it. But I think you get a pretty good movie with pretty decent lore in the back of it. Some good performances, although I think of them all, I think James Woods is too hammy and too over the top. So not a huge fan of James Woods' performance in it. But the rest of them are pretty good and, you know, pretty enjoyable, Halloween-y kind of flick, I have to say. The extras, there's some interviews in there, some brief makings of. Nothing too extensive there, although there is part 1 of a 2-part interview, the other part being in Ghost of Mars, which is the next release after this for Indicator, where John Carpenter, there's an interview with The Guardian, and I mean 40 minutes of an interview with John Carpenter is nearly worth the price of this disc all by itself, as he goes through his filmography and some of the ways in which he made the films of his catalogue, and also about some of his regrets that went along there. But that's Vampires. It's a very 3 out of 5-ish kind of week, and continuing that trend is the 101 Films Black Label release of The Cooler. And The Cooler stars William H. Macy as a man who works in a casino whose very presence kind of destroys the good run of luck that other people are going on. He's a downer, literally by trade. So as he walks around, people on hot streaks, he'll stand by them, he'll stand in the presence, and all of a sudden their good luck goes away. And he compliments the cast. That's Maria Bello, who I knew first from ER fame, Alec Baldwin, who's fantastic as the head exec of the studio, and then some other bit part characters that you'll recognise from various other TV shows and movies, people like Paul Sorvino, for instance, from The Sopranos. So, The Cooler, it's a lot better movie than I think it would have been received at the time. There was an awful lot more trying to be done with the film, an awful lot more trying to be said with the film that initially was going on. It becomes very clear in what is a 2-hour making of documentary, which is utterly brilliant, I have to say. It's probably even better than the movie itself, where Alec Baldwin and William H. Macy and a lot of people talk about the process of the filmmaking, how none of them really wanted to do it initially, but were kind of talked into it, both by meeting the director and the writer, and getting brought along with it. And you can kind of see that in some of the performances. Some things are just a bit over the top, some things aren't enough. It's kind of uneven, I think, as a film has gone along, but I did enjoy it. And I have to say, if for no other reason than that making of documentary is one of the best making of documentaries I've seen in a long time, especially about what is a sort of average movie, but one that I quite enjoyed. Probably not everybody's cup of tea. I don't think it comes out and will smash the doors of anybody, but I think a pretty good watch. Which brings me on to taking the movies up a notch in terms of quality. And I have Hana Bee, a Takeshi Kitano film. Otherwise, you might see it known as Fireworks. And in true Kitano sense, I find his films have a reputation for being incredibly violent, and there is violence in this, but there's like a really soft core. There's a really soft story about people told in all of these movies. It tells a story of a cop who, a hard-nosed cop it seems to be, who is trying to take down kind of gangland or the triad kind of organised crime within his unit, while also being tied to them by the fact that he owes them a lot of money. He took a loan out because his wife isn't well and he has to care for her. He's at the later stage of his career, and it's mainly about how this kind of like this conflict within him plays out in his relationships of the people around him. So what people believe in him, they want to be there for him, they think he's very good at his job, but ultimately they have personal cost that comes to them. And it's a great movie. It's a really, really great movie, like a lot of Kitano's movies seem to be. I've never seen a bad one yet. They're not just action movies, they're not just these action films. There's really a core and a thought that goes behind all these that's very contemplative, and this is certainly no exception. And the last film I want to talk about is the 2018 film Burning by Lee Chang-dong, which I have to say is a film that I'm really, really conflicted about. I mean, I think it's a tremendous movie that, in terms of execution of the story that it was trying to tell, falls short of what I wanted from it. But at the same stage, it's a film that I can't stop thinking about. It tells the story of a young boy and a young girl, Jaime and Lee Jong-soo, who seemed to have known each other when they were very young, although very briefly. And they meet and find each other in the big city, and they form a bit of a friendship stroke relationship. It's a bit unsure what way it's defined at the start, but so much so that when Jaime decides she wants to go to Africa to find herself or to explore the world, so to speak, she asks Lee to feed the cat. And you're not sure if there is a cat, because every time he turns up he can never see the cat, but every time he turns back in the house he sees the cat food's gone, so there must be a cat. And there's a little interplay between the two of them earlier on where it's really about what acting is, and it's about the fact that, you know, you've got to believe that there could be something there, and if there's not, there's these kind of themes that are introduced within it. Well, as Jaime comes back from her travels, she brings back Ben, and Ben is an interesting character. He seems, it's set out very early that he's a bit of a sociopath. He seems to be a man of wealth and money. He drives a very nice car, and Jaime and him form a relationship, which Lee Jong-soo doesn't seem to be all that, you know, happy about, whether in terms of he's not sure of his own feelings, or whether he just doesn't like Ben. He doesn't trust him. He's from a different world to him, and so becomes this kind of like love triangle of sorts, although it's never really defined as much. But it's a film about, or it's a film where you just question and say, well, if I only knew this one thing to be true, is there a cat? Then I would know an awful lot more about the individual characters and about their motivations. And while that's certainly true, it is a veil of filmmaking that it does, and it is challenging. And it's a film that, while I think doesn't resolve the way that I would have wanted it to, and therefore comes down, it frustrated me in that way. I'm left with a multitude of questions and a multitude of things that I want to talk about, and that make you want to watch it again and make you want to think about it even more, which is really the art of great filmmaking as it goes forward. So I hardly recommend you check out Burning, because it's a very interesting movie, and one that I definitely think people will get a lot out of. And that's my films for this week. I have watched some average movies, but I've enjoyed every single one of them. Every one that I've talked about, I've enjoyed. What have you been watching? What have you been catching up on? Always let me know down in the comments how you've been getting on, and whether you've seen any of these movies. Thanks very much for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. All the best. Bye.